Good afternoon, everyone. This is Debbie Kaufman with the Division of Elementary and Secondary Education. Thank you for joining us today to talk about the American Rescue Plan and the ESSER Funds, commonly known as ARP ESSER. Some of you may call it ESSER 3, but the U.S. Department of Ed would like for us to call it ARP ESSER. So with that, I'm going to open up my screen and begin showing you where everything is. So first of all, I want to take you to our website, to the DESE website in a quick way. If you're looking for anything related to ESSER, you can just type in CARES Act very quickly and it's going to pop up right to the top. CARES Act, CRISA, and the American Rescue Plan. And then of course it takes you to the website. At the top, because this page has gotten so long and we've just been building it as information is coming into us, then you can see that we've put in some quick links to get you dropped down to that portion of the page. But right here at the top are some critical points of information for you. The obligation timeline for ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ARP ESSER funds. So we still have time to spend our funds and to get those obligated. Information about the American Rescue Plan is here. And as you see this link takes you to the American Rescue Plan page. And it looks like this. On this page, you'll see information about ARP ESSER. There's a fact sheet. There's information if you want to see the template for state plans and all of the communication that comes back and forth between USAID and DESE. You can see all of that information here. Also, right over here is a box that if you haven't been paying attention, it just kind of started showing up. And if you click on this box, resources, what you will see is that weekly we are having webinars with USAID and they're putting out FAQs just a little tidbit at a time. So you can see those each week. Those are posted there. And as you get into the slides, you'll see some of the Q&A that's been provided to us. Also, last week, they presented a guidance document and frequently asked questions regarding ARP ESSER that we are still working through. Of course, we have read it, but we're still working through information. So we'll be coming back to you to give you additional information as we move forward. So if you're reading it, don't get alarmed. We'll take care of everything that's in it. We just want to make sure that we're giving you the best and as close to final information as we can. So one of the questions I know you're going to be asking, is this webinar recorded today? Yes. So on the CARES Act webpage is a section at the bottom called Technical Assistance. And that's where we've recorded all of our sessions and we will have that posted just as quickly as possible. Just as a reminder, below it are all of the commissioner memos that we have produced regarding ESSER 1, 2, or ARP ESSER. We try to post all of those there so that you can easily find them. So let me get back to my page and talk a little bit more about ESSER. So on this page, there are a couple of documents that I want to bring to your attention. The U.S. Department of Ed has released 2 informational documents in addition to the FAQ and those weekly slides. I would encourage you to read these. They're not very hard reads. They're pretty quick, but very informative. And in fact, lots of the information that I've included in the application came directly out of volume 2. And as you're reading the FAQ from the U.S. Department of Ed, those questions around will this expenditure count toward loss of learning or loss of instructional time, it's explained most in depth in volume 2. And volume 2 is this one right here. So I would recommend, printing that out, reading those carefully. And those are right there at the top of the CARES Act webpage. So ARP ESSER funds are available to us. We received a portion of them. And then, as you know, we have to fill out a state application to receive the remaining funds. And we are in the process of doing that and taking public comment for our plan. But as you're working through this application, you're going to be budgeting the full amount, knowing that we will begin obligation and expenditure after July 1, after we have an appropriation from the Arkansas Legislative Council. That is something we are waiting on. I also want to bring your attention to a little shift in between ESSER 1 and 2 to ARP ESSER. And if you think about our job with ESSER 1 was to prepare and respond and prevent the spread of COVID-19. And so a lot of our funds in ESSER 1 went to social distancing, masks, providing sanitation, cleaning, you've really put in amazing efforts to try to minimize and mitigate this spread of this virus. ESSER 2 is to continue that work, continue to make those processes and procedures that you put in to mitigate virus part of our ongoing work. We'll always have some kind of virus or cold or flu or something that we're working on. What can we learn from this, and what are the things that we want to put into our daily practice? But as we move into ARP ESSER funds, I want to really show you here that the shift is continue the health and safety of students, but also begin to really address the academic, social, emotional, and mental health impact of COVID-19. And as we have said before, all of these funds are intended to help us be better, in a better place at the end of this pandemic and at the end of these funds than we were at the beginning. And I think we're already seeing so much progress in our schools about the things we have learned, how we've used our data to make really wise decisions moving forward, how it will change education for Arkansas students forever. So we'll get into those. That you're going to look at your funds over three big bucket areas: creating safe and healthy learning environments, addressing that learning instructional time or loss of learning, and then supporting educator and staff stability and well-being, knowing that a minimum of 20% of ARP total ESSER funds must be set aside for number 2, addressing the instructional lost instructional time or loss of learning. In addition, all of those expenditures must be evidence-based interventions, and you can learn more about evidence-based practices at this link. So if you're looking for your allocations, those were posted in a commissioner memo and are available on our website. And you're probably asking, what can we use ARP ESSER funds on? And the allowable uses of funds remain the same as we had with ESSER 1, as we have with ESSER 2, and now with ARP ESSER. For more information, you can read our commissioner memos that are posted here. Of course, this one is the one that we posted somewhat earlier on guidance on the use of ESSER funds. And I'll be kind of walking through that one with us today. So, and then if your codes remain the same, and Kathleen's on here, so she may tell us if she's done any adjustment to the funds. So today we're going to get into the documents that you will need to submit and that you will need to maintain. Let me pause, see if any of our panelists have anything to add before we move into the documents. All right. The first document that we're going to go into is the LEA Assurance Document. So let me pull you back out to this page and just show you right here, Part B, Signed Assurances. And you're probably saying, why didn't I start with Part A? Well, Part A is included in Part B, so I'll show it all to you. Signed Assurances. So let's go to that document. The LEA Signed Assurances is posted on our website. It's also attached to the Commissioner memo announcing this webinar. In the assurance, I just want to bring your attention to some critical components. And the first one is that LEA's districts are required to have meaningful consultation around their plans, all of their plans. In this document, it tells you the people that must be engaged. Notice the word must. You must engage in meaningful consultation with this list of stakeholders. So my recommendation to you is to document that. Document your meaningful engagement. And so I'll tell you very quickly, we're in the process of doing that right now. So I'm going to jump down and pull up our stakeholder survey just to kind of give you an example of what we're doing. So for the state application for ARP ESSER funds, we are sending a survey. Hopefully you've already completed the survey, and if you've not, Stacy will post this in the chat, and we encourage you to not only take the survey but share it with others. So we're looking for what are the most pressing needs, suggestions, and you can read it as you go through. But one of the components that's in this question is all of those stakeholders. So as you're looking through this, this may be something that you would like to duplicate for yourself. If it is, feel free to do that. We're more than happy to share this survey. So meaningful consultation. Meaningful consultation is just a component that's ongoing. So our family and community engagement team is willing to help you in any way. Just reach out to Chelsea Moore if you need assistance in this work. And this is ongoing. So you can leave your surveys up on your website and let people continue to provide feedback. You don't just have to have them for 30 days. You can leave them up and keep coming back to them and checking as you're updating your plans. So number 2 is the LEA plan for safe return to in-person instruction. Well, guys, we've been in person for a full school year. However, we do have students that may or may not have been in person for a school year. And certainly the goal is to encourage those kids to come back to school and to join us for in-person instruction. I do realize some of you are applying for digital learning applications, but even though you're doing that, you still have many students that need to be back on site. So you may call this your Arkansas Ready for Learning plan, but the key point is that there is a continuity of services. So in this continuity of services, the requirement for ARP ESSER funds is that every 6 months, no less than every 6 months, a plan is revised to ensure in-person instruction and continuity of service. This plan is right here. It must ensure, provide your guidance and policies regarding masks, physical distancing, hand washing, healthy facilities, contact tracing, vaccinations, and accommodations, all spelled out right here and underlined in your assurance. Now, before you get excited, let's stop right there. We sent out a memo sometime back, and in that memo, we talked about having a summary. And so you took your Ready for Learning plan. Some of you may have updated that, posted it on your website by April 15th, or you may have taken out just this section that addresses these issues and called it a summary. and posted that on your website and asked for public comment. If you haven't done it, do it now. Just begin to work on it right now and get it posted. But this is something, instead of you having to submit to us all the time, because this is a required, it's a requirement for you to have this on your website, then what we will do is our standards and system support team will be monitoring your websites and checking to make sure that this is available to the public. So if you didn't get it up by April 15th, you still have time to get it up. Just make sure that you've addressed these areas. Now, I would also encourage you to take your Ready for Learning plan for 2021 and archive that in your under state required information. Just archive it like you do old school improvement plans or district support plans. Archive that because many of you are paying for additional pay based on all of those additional duties that you want to keep that document archived. And just like you're going to, as you update these, you're going to archive these somewhere in your record keeping to show that you did this every 6 months. We'll be sending out a commissioner memo just to remind you that we're staying on a timeline, and we'll be keeping you informed that this plan needs to be updated every April 15th and every October 15th. So we'll try to send you a commissioner memo at least 30 days ahead of time, just to remind you to check your public comment, update your plan. If the CDC or the Arkansas Department of Health sends out revised guidance, it may cause us to have to update our plans more often. But the intent is that at least every 6 months. Number 3 on the assurance is the use of ARP ESSER funds. As noted in this top section, if it was allowable for ESSER 1, it's allowable for ESSER 2, it's allowable for ARP ESSER. The only difference is that under ARP ESSER, you must reserve not less than 20% of the total amount to address learning loss. And you have to ensure that the interventions you apply to that learning loss actually bring about a change for students' academic, social, and emotional needs, and address the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on student subgroups. All ARP ESSER funds must be reasonable, necessary, and allocable. So I want to stop right there because, as some of you may know, we are already monitoring written justifications. And I think you've heard us say this on every webinar and in many of our emails. Every purchase, every expenditure with ESSER funds must have a written justification. It must relate to COVID. If you can't relate it to COVID, reasonably relate it to COVID, then you can't spend ESSER funds. So is my purchase related to ESSER, to COVID-19? If so, move on to the next question. The next question, is the cost reasonable? Let me give you some examples of what would be an accurate justification. I have a sole source letter from the vendor for this product. That makes it reasonable. I took bids and selected the lowest price. I looked at the item from 3 different vendors and took a fair market value of, and I would name my vendors. So I looked at Walmart, I looked at Lowe's, I looked at Home Depot, and I have a fair market value was the same across all 3. So you need to be specific. Maybe you took bids, but you didn't take the lowest price. You took the price that had the better quality product. Just explain what you're doing and why that's a reasonable price. It may be more reasonable to rent than to purchase. Jane, anything else we can add to that?
Not that I can think of. Just be very thorough in your justification, where there's no doubt that it fits a COVID cause and especially a reasonable expense.
So one of the things that I'm looking for in the COVID relation is the word COVID, right? So if it's connected to COVID, it probably says COVID or transmission of the virus or something, pandemic, something like that. When I'm looking for reasonable, I'm trying to figure out how you made a decision that that price was within reason for what you were getting. What did you compare it against? And then third, is it necessary? Why? That's where why do you need it? What's the data from your stakeholders that tell you need this? So every expenditure has a written justification attached to it. Jane, I think you've told some people they could put it on write it on your purchase order. We've seen that. We've seen some that have taken our form and utilized that. We see some that are just putting down really good notes. Format's not important to us. It's the quality of what you're writing down. All right. So
Hey, Deb.
Yes.
We've got this question a couple of times. They're asking if justification only applies to ARP ESSER, and that's not true. It's for all the ESSER funds, 1, 2, and ARP, correct?
Correct.
And another point I just want to make too is when you're talking about what's reasonable, what's necessary, that you have to look at that in the aspect of your own district. What is reasonable and necessary in one district may not be the case in another district. So when you're doing your justification form, you're doing it for your district and justifying why that purchase was necessary due to COVID and how it was reasonable.
Yes, that's exactly right, Stacy. It's always within context. So it has to be your data. Straight points. All right, reporting is section 4 of the assurance. I would encourage you to read through this. I'm not going to read it to you, but record keeping, reporting is critical. I encourage you to archive your documentation for the things that you are doing, the number of students that are coming to summer school, who are they, who are you providing these extra services to? You just can't have too much documentation. Number 5, the GAPA statement. The GAPA statement is a plan that I want to jump in here and kind of bring you to the definition. The GAPA statement is a description that the LEA proposes to take to ensure that there are no barriers to equity. Anything that impedes the equal access to or participation in a program. Most of you already have a GAPA plan uploaded into the ESSER folder. You might want to look at it, make sure it's still accurate. You only have to have one. So if when you go in to upload these documents into your ESSER folder in InduStar, if your GAPA statement's there and you're happy with it, you're done. That part's pretty easy. Number 6, additional requirements. Just to remind you as you read through this that we must follow all Uniform Grant Guidance or UGG-UG and all Education Department General Administrative Regulations as noted in EDGAR and whatever else U.S. Department of Ed sends us to do. So in signing this assurance, you're assigning to commit that you have read this assurance and understand it, and that you will be posting that continuity of services plan on your website keeping that updated every 6 months, that you will be posting your ARP user plan for use of ESSER funds by August 15th, and that you will be engaging all stakeholders as listed in this document to ensure that ARP ESSER funds are really a reflection of the needs of your school district. Let me stop. Stacy, any questions around the assurance?
I think you've done a great job covering the assurance. One thing you might want to do when you go back to the main web page is show everybody again where you found that assurance document on that page, like starting at the top and scrolling down, because I think some folks are having difficulty finding what we just looked at.
Okay, so I'm going to scroll back up to the top. I'm at the very top of the CARES Act, CRIS Act, American Rescue Plan Act. And right here starts, the red bar always starts a new pot of money. So here we are in ARP ESSER funds. And I'm going to take a quick scroll down till I come to the first table. ARP ESSER Application. A complete and full application is your LEA plan for continuity of services that you've already posted on your website. And if you haven't, you're going to. I'm just confident in you that you're going to update it every 6 months. And then we just went over the LEA signed assurances, signed when your superintendent signs it, and you submit it by June 24th by posting it in the ESSER folder in Industar. Very easy breezy. All
Thank
right.
you, Deb.
Now we're going to move to what I'm calling Part C, or if you read the Commissioner memo, you might see it listed as Attachment 2. It is the plan for use of funds. And so if I click on that, it's going to bring me to the plan for use of funds. We tried to make this as easy and simple as possible so that you have time to do more conversation, more feedback, more meaningful consultation with your stakeholders. District name, LEA, city superintendent's name. But there's two right here I want to really invite you to pay attention to. The URL access to where you're posting this plan on your website and the date posted. So if you come back and say, oh, I need to revise this, that's fine. So you're going to have your initial post date. You'll just drop down a new line and put revised and put a revised date and resubmit. So you have that option. Just let us know when you're doing it so we can help you in any way. So the plan for use of ESSER funds requires you to plan the full allocation amount. It doesn't mean that you're stuck to that. You can revise it. I realize costs change, but you're making kind of big budget blocks of funding. I think I'm going to spend $1 million here, or I'm going to spend $500,000 here. So you're kind of budgeting out based on your meaningful stakeholder engagement, how you may plan to spend your money. Now, in these sections, there are requirements, and I'm going to go over those. So as you look in each one of these three big pots, let me show you how that might look. So if you're planning to spend funds to create safe and healthy learning environments, this is still the same program codes that you've seen before. It's still the same practice. So if we came back to that original document, let me see if I have that linked quickly. Too many links open on my webpage. I do not. If you pulled back up the document that came out previously in a commissioner's memo, you will see that these are the same headings that we've used before, systematic procedures. Now, as you're looking through here into these three big pots, creating safe and healthy learning environments, if I'm thinking that I want to improve actions or systems to prevent, prepare, respond to COVID-19, I can put my projected amount. If I'm going to use funds to meet the nutritional needs, support student mental health needs, locate absent students and re-engage them, provide safe and inclusive learning environments, provide healthy learning environment. I'm still under that same systematic procedures pot, and there are my normal program codes. You can go back to our memo. Nothing has changed. This is still addressing this section of creating safe and healthy learning environments. You can put one amount for that whole section if that's something you plan to use funds on. Also, in that section of creating safe and healthy learning environments are facilities. If you are adding classrooms or converting space to allow for social distancing, if you're adding routes or purchasing buses to improve social distancing or air quality, those are things that you can budget here. We've already spelled those out for you because we already have those, they're already approved uses of ESSER funds. If there's something else in that category that we did not put in that's specific to your context, write it in, let us look at it and make sure that it's an allowable use of funds. But you can add as many rows to be as specific as you want to be, or you can use the categories that we've provided. Any questions about creating safe and healthy learning environments? All right, the second big pot of funds is the one that probably has us thinking a lot about, and that's addressing lost instructional time or loss of learning. In this one, you are going to at least set aside at least 20%. So if you write in your, write in your full allocation and then calculate what is your minimum 20% set aside and put it here. That's to help guide you in your checking of this. Now, are you limited to 20%? No, you could spend 100% of your ARP ESSER funds on loss of learning and getting your kids caught up, accelerating your students, as long as you're using evidence-based practices. But the minimum requirement is 20%. The department is responsible for monitoring your use of funds here to ensure that you have utilized 20%. So just know we'll be keeping an eye on it. Now, what constitutes this allowable expense under addressing learning loss or loss of learning? It could be, and as you come back to this COVID-19 volume 2, this is where all of this information came from. I just strongly encourage you to go in there and look. We didn't make this up. Everything comes right out of the guidance from the U.S. Department of Ed. You could accelerate learning through instructional approaches. That would be something we would strongly encourage, is to accelerate learning, not just remediate, but try to get kids caught up, accelerate. You can do it through in-school acceleration, tutoring programs, out-of-school time programs, summer learning and enrichment. So here's what people are going to ask. First question I know you're going to ask, well, what can I pay out of that? So I'm going to bring you right back up to the paragraph that says right here, the full implementation of the evidence-based interventions include the personnel, materials, equipment, professional development, and expenses needed to meet the needs of the students. So can I hire a reading interventionist? Yes. Can I hire tutors? Yes. But it has to meet the evidence-based practice and it has to get results. Can I purchase high-quality instructional materials? Yes. Write up your written justification and go forward. Put your projected amounts here. What we've also included as being a good model is to show you that if you follow this description, we've also included the effect size out of Hattie's work and the level of evidence-based as that applies. Now, also, in addition to accelerating learning through instructional approaches, you could support equitable access and effective use of technology through engaging families in digital learning training. What lessons did we learn from last year? How do we get our parents more engaged so that they're more supportive of students learning? Not just remote students, but students in our classroom. How do we best utilize our resources to help every child learn? We could use data about students' opportunity to learn to help target resources and support. So what data systems can you put in place to know where your students are? And Stacy, I think we're going to be offering some new data systems from the department.
Yeah, we're going to be putting out smart data is coming out. School districts will have the opportunity to get some training this summer, but it's to assist districts in kind of recognizing students who are at risk. So thanks for pointing that out. Commissioner's memo went out this last week.
So this is about making sure, and I just want to keep emphasizing this, we have a responsibility to ensure that every child who is in any way falling behind is caught up, accelerated. We need to try to get every kid back on grade level with their reading, with their math, everything, take care of their social emotional needs. So what do we need to know about them in order to provide the best support? And then addressing those resource inequities. What can we do to ensure students have equitable access to a well-rounded education? That may be that advanced coursework, it could be inclusive practices, it could be making sure that you have well-prepared educators. Once again, we're doing things at the state level, like offering opportunities for teachers to get special ed certification. Is that the right word? So just think about what is it you need to do to make your school a better place, though, so that all students are learning. In addition, as you're addressing those resource inequities, you could be providing wraparound services. This is an opportunity to take care of every child and their needs so they can learn. Are they hungry? Do they have a good, warm, dry house to live in? Are they homeless? Are they in foster care? What are the things that are going on with them that they need support so that they can learn? This is really an opportunity to think outside the box and have the funds to do what needs to be done to serve students. Finally, any evidence-based practice to maximize the social, emotional, and academic benefits for kids. If you are doing professional learning communities, wow, that's a tier 2 evidence. So there's really a lot of range here. Again, as you're filling out your plan for use of funds, we've given you boxes. If you want to write in specifically what you're doing so that your community knows, you can put it there. If it's this same thing called by another name, feel free to personalize your information in here. We've tried to fill this out to make it easy for you to go in and just put your budgeted amounts, but it needs to tell your story. Any questions about section 2? Loss of learning.
Deb, I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I know that the 20% set aside has seemed overwhelming to some districts in the amount that is equivalent to with their allocation, but please remember that you've gotten to 2024 to use that 20%. So it's not like you have to meet that 20% this summer to make up for lost learning. This is over the period of availability of those funds. So that's until September 2024.
Great point, Jane. So another part of the requirements under section 2 or big bucket number 2 is you have to monitor the implementation. So if this top part is our plan, how do we plan to provide intervention? Then this is our do. How will we check to make sure it's being done? How will we ensure that these interventions are being implemented? So let's think about what might I write in this box? How might I ensure that interventions are being implemented? Maybe I'm checking in during my PLC time to make sure that to see what the progress is. Maybe the principal is monitoring monthly or quarterly to ensure that students, the interventions are being implemented. Maybe you're checking to make sure that the appropriate students are involved in the interventions, that no one has been left out. Lots of creative ways to internally check to make sure that you're doing what you said at the top that you were going to do. And then finally, 2B is how will you know it's working? Remember, we're required to ensure that such interventions respond to the students' academic, social, emotional needs. How will you evaluate that? So I would expect that you may be doing some pre or post tests. You may have some anecdotal notes. You may be interviewing teachers or parents or students. You may be utilizing the summative assessments. What are some other ways that you can check to see that the interventions worked? So we've got plan, do, check in pot number 2. Any questions? All right, so let me kind of recap where we are. In our plan for use of funds, we're going to have a safe and healthy environment. That was number 1. Number 2, we're going to address learning loss and ensure that we have been equitable, ensure there is no child that is lacking in need, because we have funds to ensure that their needs are met. So the U.S. Department of Ed would encourage you to spend the majority of your money in these areas. If you have funds remaining out of ARP ESSER, then certainly you need to consider bucket number 3, supporting your educators and staff stability and well-being. Now, in this conversation, you could be thinking about technology that improves your school. Most of you have done a really good job of ensuring that your devices are one-to-one, that teachers have up-to-date equipment to be able to provide the very best instruction and to teach our essential standards. You may consider possible additional pay. We have many school districts this year that are paying additional pay for additional duties due to COVID-19. I know that some of you are going to ask me immediately, can we pay for vaccinations? And we are investigating that. We hope to have more information out to you soon about what, if that's possible, and what would be the proper way to go about that. So be patient. We are definitely working on it. Of course, under maintenance of equity, you know that you must continue operations without disruption to your programs. I know some of you are going to be thinking about setting money aside for budget shortfalls, and that is something that we will be working with our colleagues this summer to help you think through that and what documentation you'll need to ensure that we've done that correctly and provided the appropriate resources for you. So the superintendent would print and sign their name and date. This document just showing that this is our projected budget. Questions? So I'm going to bring you back to our website again and remind you that right up here at the top, just scroll down to the first box and you will see that there are 3 parts to a complete plan. Your continuity of services that's posted on your website, along with your availability for public comment. Many of you are doing like a Google form where people can fill out their public comment. It's coming in, you're just leaving that up all the time and taking that information periodically as you go in to post. We will remind you that at least every 6 months that has to be updated, and then we'll be checking your website. So please note when you're revising, please note revision dates so that it's very clear what's current, what's old. You will have a signed assurance document that's available here in Word or PDF for you to download and sign. Superintendent will sign that. It's posted in your ESSER folder in InDestar. Once that has been posted, then after July 1st, as soon as we have an appropriation from the Arkansas Legislative Council, then you can begin obligating and expending ESSER 3 funds. And finally, then your plan for use of funds, once again, engaging meaningful consultation from stakeholders, you will post that in InDestar and on your district website. If you revise it, you'll notify Ms. Green and let her know, hey, we're going to modify, upload your modified or revised plan and post it to your district website. All right, Ms. Smith, that's all of my notes. Do we have any questions that we can answer?
You did a great job. Well, you could do me a favor. Will you go back to share your screen and go back to the actual application again on that section B? So part B. Yeah, so guys, one thing when you go up to that more of the chart so they can see the descriptions. On this part right here where she's added all these descriptions in, this is actually a help for you, all right? Ms. Kaufman's team, what they did is, because you have to use evidence-based practices on things that you're spending your money on. And so what they did is they went through and went ahead and listed things that had evidence-based practices, listed the tiers. They kind of did some homework for you so that you could just focus on, this is the amount of money we're spending in that category. This list is not exhaustive, okay? These are just things that we have heard districts talking about throughout the state already that we knew had evidence-based practices with it. So professional learning communities, you see that in here. It's listed right down here on this one. So it's tier 2. So if you know that you're doing some professional development in that area, you could do a big budget item in that. Now this, again, this is not everything that you could have, but you would have to do the legwork and the homework on other things that you added to the list. But this was her team trying to help you guys out so you wouldn't have to go through and write descriptions for all that. So we appreciate the extra work you did on that, Deb. And then that 2A section right below that, when you decide, hey, this is what we're spending our money on for learning loss, how are you as a district? This is you doing that whole plan, do, check that Deb loves so much. How are you going to ensure that what you chose to spend your money on, that it's actually working? What data are you going to look at? How are you going to determine if there's something you need to assist or change or do something a little bit? This is where you're describing that process. Big picture for your district and how you're going to do that. So tried to make it as simple as we could, but at the same time, these are the requirements that the state has for us to ensure in our state application what we're doing. And so this is your LEA application that they put together for you. So good job today, Deb.
Thanks.
Jane, do you see any questions coming in on the chat or on the Q&A that we probably need to answer or talk about, or have most of them been answered?
I think a lot of them have been answered. There's one on there about paid COVID leave for employees in 21, 22. I haven't seen, Deb, you may have to, I haven't seen anything that says that that changes in the future on they're eligible to use these funds for COVID leave.
Yes, I mean, you
Yeah,
have
I mean,
to,
I haven't seen anything that says that there's going to change in that. And they've always been able to use those ESSER funds when the state ran out of the pot of money that they were using to pay that COVID leave with. We allowed districts to move over and use their ESSER funds to cover that COVID leave. So I haven't seen anything that has said they can't do that in the future.
I haven't seen anything either. I do know that if you're going to do that, you need to make sure that you've attached your policy.
Right.
So if your policy is to pay COVID leave during the pandemic, then I would attach that as a part of my justification. One of the things I just shared with you here in the chat is this one pager. This one pager is, if I can get rid of that chat, this one pager is exactly what I just went over. I walked you through the web page, but for myself, I prepared just links. Here's the web page. Here's the FAQ. We have not updated the FAQ yet. We will do that after this meeting as we start reading all of your questions that you're posting. We'll make sure that we've done that. But I just kind of put everything together in a very short, very quick page and a half to give to you, just so if you needed to print something out to kind of have on your desk as a cheat sheet of all of the information, it's there for you. Our state application, as I mentioned, does require us to get meaningful consultation with stakeholders. One of the tools we're using is a stakeholder survey. You're welcome to click on that, look at it, maybe construct yours of similar. And then the first thing I started off with was USAID resources, and I've given you the quick link to get to that as well.
I did want to bring back the point that Greg's talking about. So we have to go and get appropriation from the Arkansas legislature. And at this point for ESSER 3, we don't have that yet. That is something that we expect to have by July. So at this point, people need to hold off on spending from ARP ESSER, be focusing on your ARP ESSER 1 or your ESSER 1 funds and your ESSER 2, not your ARP funds at this point. The application that Deb walked through today is for ARP ESSER 3. All right, you're budgeting for that last pot of money that's coming. Okay, you've already been shared what your district's allocation is, but we'll get the appropriation and then we'll be able to send that money out in July, hopefully, start reimbursing you for it. As far as justification, every district is responsible for keeping up with their paperwork and justification on all federal funds. So that includes ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and the ARP funds. When auditing comes through and they're auditing what you spent, they're going to be looking at the rules and guidelines that were put out by the U.S. Department of Ed and the state, and looking to see if you spent your money according to the rules and regs for those funds. And so that's on you to be able to justify and keep up with that for all of your funds for auditing purposes. Is there anything there, Greg or Deb, as far as the money justification and the appropriation I didn't say? Okay.
Amy, do you have anything else to add?
Okay. Let me look here.
Sorry. Okay. Hey, Stacey, you were talking about the appropriation. Right now, we don't have the authority to obligate or spend those ARP ESSER funds, so we can't obligate them at all right now. We've got a request to go into the General Assembly to ask for it, but right now we cannot obligate those funds. And if we obligate those funds and we don't get the appropriation, then we can't pay those funds next fiscal year either, because we have to have the authorization in the current fiscal year to obligate those funds. And right now we don't have that. So that's why we're saying you can't obligate those. Saw a few questions about obligating the funds for tutors and stuff like that. We can't do that right now because we don't have the authorization yet.
And Greg, as soon as we get that, we'll put out a commissioner memo letting people know we're available.
Yeah, we can notify, we can let them know once we get authorization, once we get the appropriation.
That's great. Barbara's asked if we're not sure about an expenditure meeting the guidelines. Let me just say that to expedite whether or not something is allowable, if you would write up the justification, it makes it much faster because we don't have to come back and ask as many context questions. So if you write up your justification, how's it related to, how does it have a COVID relationship? How is the cost reasonable? And that you know it's reasonable because you've checked it somewhere. Why is it necessary based on the data for your school? If you write that up, then we can look at those pretty quickly and know if that's an allowable expenditure based in the context that you're putting it. So if I just go out and saw something that I'm thinking, how is that related to COVID? But in your school district, it's very related because of the context of what's going on in your school and what the needs of your students are. It might not be allowable in another district where they don't have that context. So if you would write that up and send it to us instead of those short questions, can I do this? Well, we don't know if you can. We need to know the context. And it will also help us help you make sure that you've got good, solid written justifications for the use of these federal funds. Ross, anything that you want to speak to regarding CTE? Because certainly if you can expend Perkins funds, then you can expend ESSER funds for those same items.
And I think, Deb, I mean, what you just stated is the clearest way that it can be, I think, explained at this moment is, I mean, it's those federal funds piece. And I know there's been some questions from CTE coordinators about supplanting, but I think our big conversation has been regards that it's federal funds as well.
Yeah, there is no supplement supplant as long as you have a solid written justification. That's the part that really helps you to know if you can expend these funds. Tim, any additional from facilities?
No, I think you covered everything, especially that justification. That's the most critical component.
Yeah, and as you're reading through all of the FAQs that are coming out from the U.S. Department of Ed, there's information in there that will cause us to need to come back to you at a later date with more information. We're still getting clarification and unpacking all of that, and we'll bring it to you as quickly as possible and as soon as we have good, thorough information. So to recap today, if you do have questions about expenditures, you can send those to jane.green@ade.arkansas.gov or to me, and I'll forward them to Jane. But Jane looks over most of our expenditures to make sure that we stay in good relationship with the U.S. Department of Ed. If you, everything that we've gone over today is on the CARES Act webpage. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to address them in future meetings or on the phone in any way that we can provide technical support to you. We are more than happy to do it. Stacy, anything that we've left off?
Nope, not at this point. I think you've covered a lot. Good job.
Thank you. So we appreciate everyone. We hope you've had a great July 1st and that you can set about with your meaningful consultation and get your plans in order. So as soon as Greg gives us the green light on the appropriations, we'll be ready to utilize ARP ESSER funds. Let me just close by saying you still have ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 possibly, and you can continue to utilize those. We do have appropriations for them. So go ahead and utilize ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, and we'll let you know as soon as ARP ESSER funds are appropriated. All right, well, with that, thank you so much for joining us today. This will be recorded and posted, and we appreciate you staying informed on our commissioner memos, and that's where we will continue to provide you the latest information. Thanks, everyone.